Hi, everybody. My name is Jay Ferguson. I'm a filmmaker in Toronto, Canada. I work on lots of different stuff. I work on fiction, I work on documentary, I work on reality. I kind of do it all. I work as a producer, as a director, as a cinematographer, as a writer. And your teacher asked me to just make a quick video recording here to share a couple of ideas with you. She sent me a list of questions about things that she thought I should talk about, and it's interesting because there's things like research and asking the right questions and where to find stories and all that sort of thing. And I'm going to I'll touch on each one of these things, but I think what I'd like to start with first is that probably the most important thing that you can possibly imagine in doing fiction, documentary, and I know you're focused on documentaries, but in any of it, it's all about storytelling. It's all about storytelling. It's about telling a story. And the stories that you love to watch, the stories you love to hear, the stories that are the most compelling stories are the ones that are told properly, told really, really well. And this is a hard thing. This is a skill. This is a skill that you need to practice and you need to work on. You need to think about it. You need to be constantly thinking about in every stage of the process that you go through. From the very beginning to the very end, it's going to be all about storytelling. That's what has to be in the foremost of your mind. So you start at A, and then you want to get to B, and you want to get to C, and D, and E, and F, and G, and right down the line. So you have to know where you're going to begin and where you're going to end and how you're going to get there in a compelling way. It's like a mystery. It's like, how do I let little pieces of information out to let the story go? And next time you watch a movie, sorry, that's my phone ringing. Next time you watch a movie, whether it's a documentary or a fiction film, I want you to really be conscious of it. In fact, it's a great exercise. Look at it and say to yourself, okay, how is the information being released in each scene? And usually every scene is releasing some critical piece of information. Now, sometimes some stories are very complicated and they have various different things intertwining different stories. But find one and just look and say, like, okay, what do I know in this next scene that is different from the last scene? And that's what you're going to do as filmmakers, is that you're going to build this very cool structure. It's like you have a foundation, and then the first floor, and the second floor, and the third floor, and the fourth floor, and the fifth floor, and suddenly you've built 100 stories, and you can step back and go, I get it. And there's a sense of satisfaction looking at that. So I want to touch on a couple of points, and I also don't want to talk too long because I'm sure watching this video will get boring after a while. But one of the things I want to talk about is about research and the very beginnings of making your documentary. And research is really critical, and I think that often it's like in anything, it can probably often sort of feel like it's not so interesting. But the work that you do in your research is the thing that is actually going to lay the foundation for the whole rest of your storytelling. So in your research, you're going to find out if this is even a story worth telling. Really start out with, look for the basic principles. Is there a beginning to the story? Is there a middle of the story? Is there an end of the story? Start with 3 stories. You don't have to do 100 stories right away, but start with those 3 stories. Is there a beginning? It's like, I bought a dog, I lost my dog, and then I found my dog. I, does it complete? Is there something satisfying? Is there something where you go like, oh yeah, this is great. This is actually of interest. There's a resolution. There's satisfaction for me at the end of the story. And your research is really going to tell you that. And you've got to dig deep and don't get lazy. It's really easy to get lazy, and I still get lazy. And that's why I always show my research work to other colleagues, because they will call me out on my laziness. But don't get lazy if you can help it, and show it to each other and question each other and say, like, this doesn't have an ending, or this doesn't have a middle, or this doesn't have a beginning. It's also possible. So you have to really poke and push at the idea that you're looking at, and just to really make sure that it has something compelling that an audience is actually going to watch. And you have to get it out of your brain. You got to write it down, because when it's in your brain does this amazing thing. It does this like autocomplete. It's like Google, your brain. It autocompletes. It'll fill in the holes, and it'll just wash right over them. I do it all the time. I have this idea for a story. I'll go, this is the best story any human has ever had in their entire life. And then I'll go to write it down, and it's like not at all interesting. It's a terrible story. It like maybe had a beginning but no end. Anyways, so really, that's all part of the research stage, and you really want to go in and dig in and find and say like, okay, maybe there is a beginning and maybe the ending isn't obvious, but you can kind of search and look and prod and talk to people and do check things on the internet. So really, research is totally key. So I would highly recommend that you spend some time on research. Um, how to ask good questions. So now in your research you should also build your structure. Before I get into the actual filming or asking the questions, it's like maybe you know this already, but I was amazed when I first learned this. But documentaries have scripts. Now it's not like a fiction script where it's written word by word by word, but it's actually really like there's scripts. Like directors, we sit down and we go, okay, this is the first act, this is the second act, this is the third act. These are the elements that I need. I need to do this because I know the story already. I know the story really well. I know what has to happen and what pieces I have to tell to the audience. Now, sometimes stories will change, especially if it's a documentary. It can change along the way. But start with a blueprint, a really solid blueprint, and then you can always alter it as you go along. And that's kind of the exciting part about documentary filmmaking, is that it's malleable. So have your story all written out, and then what you got to do is you got to figure out the questions you're going to ask your subjects in order to draw that story out. And as I said, you'll find interesting things along the way, but you want to draw that story out. You want to say, okay, so you've got to say like, and you don't just say like, do you have a dog? Because that's a yes or no answer. You don't want to ask that stuff. No yes or no answers. You got to ask questions that elicit full responses. So you say, I mean, if you could say, tell us about getting your dog, or even you could be even more vague. Do you have a pet, and how did you end up getting a pet? And the idea is that, and listen to what they're saying and say, okay, all right, now I have that part of the story. Now I have the beginning part of the story. Now can you tell me what happened to your dog? And it's like, okay, well, my dog got lost, and it was a terrible day, and it was rainy, and blah, blah. Okay, great. Now I've got the middle part, and then it's like, now please, what happened in the end with your dog after it was lost? And the idea is that you want to draw people out. Here's the other thing too. You may have noticed in right now that I like to talk. I like to talk a lot, and I will keep talking for hours, and you'll probably miss recess because of it, or lunch. The point is that don't talk too much when you're doing an interview. This is my one piece of advice, and I had to train myself how to do this. But what you can do is that you want them to talk. And awkward silences, we as human beings, we love to fill awkward silences. It's our nature. Nobody likes it to be awkward. But if somebody's answering a question, and they may have answered the question, and there's a pause, and you think that there's maybe something else there, just wait. And the amazing thing is that because of that desire to fill awkward silences, your subject will fill it. And often that's when they fill it with amazing stuff. That's the thing that they didn't think of saying. Their brain is searching for stuff to fill the silence, and they want to keep on topic, and they'll give you amazing stuff. Anyways, those are a couple little tips, but make sure that your questions are really about the story, what you're going. Now, one thing is somebody may say something incredible, like saying that, well, along the way, my dog also bit a guy, and then you'll go, oh, okay, I didn't know about that part of the story. I didn't have that in my research, so now maybe it's time for us to go down that path. So you go down that path and you talk about it, and maybe it'll work later on, but make sure you always come back to the story once you've completed that line of questioning. Editing. What to leave in and what to leave out. This is the hardest thing in the world, but it comes right back to the same principle: storytelling. Are you telling your story? I know of so many films that I've worked on and friends of mine have worked on where you have a sequence It's like the best sequence ever. It's so good, but it doesn't help the story. And those sequences have got to go, and it's painful. It's totally painful. It's like you may have spent a lot of money and effort and time and traveled halfway across the world to get this one interview and do this one part, and in the end, it doesn't serve the story. It doesn't serve what the audience's experience is. Out. Cutting room floor. Get rid of it. And the best way to do this is because as you're editing your film, because now you've done the research, you've done the shooting, you've done the editing, you've got a cut, you're proud of it, you've worked so hard, you can barely stay awake, you've been working so hard on this thing, and then you're going to show it to friends, and this is the worst part, because they're going to say, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. That works, that works, that works. Make sure there's positive feedback as well. And then you're going to have to go at it again, and you're going to have to start making tough decisions. So the editing process is where you make the really tough decisions. We always say, make the show fat, cut it fat, make it as big as you can, put everything in, and then start to whittle it down till it's lean and mean and just like an awesome little story. Okay. Elements of a good story, like what makes a good story. That's really, really, really hard to say. I would say, good story is when it can be character based. So if your character is extremely compelling, if the story is unusual, but most stories need to have some kind of human element. It has to connect with the audience. It has to have some sort of connection so that we understand. So it needs to say a story needs to start off with a guy, a guy buying a dog, now that I think of my example, might not be the best in the world. It's not the most engaging idea. But it's like, maybe the story is that the guy always wanted a dog his whole entire life and he thought he would never have one. And then he got a dog and immediately we have drama. So you're always looking for conflict. As a filmmaker, as a documentary filmmaker, you're always looking for conflict. There always needs to be a conflict. And so good storytelling is about a conflict. So next time you watch a TV show or a movie or read a book or really any kind of storytelling, you're going to notice that there's a conflict that's going to happen probably almost immediately. There's very rarely not a conflict that comes in, and that's what you're sinking your teeth into, is that what's the conflict, and I want to see it resolved because these are conflicts that I have in my life, and I can relate to this, and these sort of, your audience relates to things in many different ways. So it's like, what's the conflict, and how do we then build the conflict, and then how do we resolve the conflict? So really think about that. Storytelling is about conflict. If there's no conflict, if the story is just a guy gets a dog, you may not go pay for that at the movie theater and watch it. It's not so interesting. I've been talking now, I see, for 13 minutes. That might be enough. But please, if you have any questions or any ideas or any thoughts about the things I've said, you can just email them to me through your teacher, or send me a video back, and I'll be happy to respond. And this time I'll respond faster. I'm sorry it took me a long time. I'm up here in Canada, we're just like, the snow's just melting. I was digging myself out. Anyways, guys, I hope that everything's going well, and I really, really do look forward to hearing back from you. Okay, take care. Thanks, guys. Bye bye.